He said it like he was reminding me to take out the trash. Not angry. Not even slightly raised. Just flat, deliberate, the way a man speaks when he has already decided the conversation is over before it begins. Mom, Nicole needs you to co-sign the refinance. The house goes into both our names or we're going to have a real problem here. I was standing in my own kitchen. The kitchen where I had made 31 Thanksgivings, where I had taught my son Daniel how to crack an egg when he was 6 years old, laughing because he always used both hands and got shell everywhere. Where his father and I had sat at that same table the night we paid off the mortgage, opened a bottle of wine we couldn't really afford, and cried a little because we had done it. We had actually done it. And now my son was standing on the other side of that table, arms crossed, telling me there was going to be a real problem. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I picked up my coffee mug and I said, "I'll think about it." He nodded, like that was acceptable, like he had simply placed an order and was waiting for it to be filled. I watched him walk out of the kitchen. I heard him go upstairs, heard the low murmur of his voice as he told his wife how the conversation went. I stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard. The rose bushes Gerald had planted the spring before he died were blooming early that year. Big, full, almost embarrassingly red. I thought about the fact that I had not slept well in 4 months, not since the two of them had moved in. My name is Margaret. I am 67 years old. I live in a house in Asheville, North Carolina, that Gerald and I bought when Daniel was 3. It is not a large house. 3 bedrooms, a sunroom Gerald built himself on weekends over 2 summers, a backyard that backs up to a small creek. It is the kind of house that holds a life in it. You can feel it in the walls. Gerald passed 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I will not say I recovered from that because I do not think you recover. You just learn how to carry it differently. For 2 years after, I lived alone in this house, and I will tell you honestly, it was not easy. But it was mine. My quiet. My rhythms. My roses in the backyard and my coffee at 5 in the morning and my books stacked on Gerald's side of the bed because I could not bear to leave that space completely empty. Daniel called me every Sunday. He lived in Charlotte then, working as a project manager for a construction firm. He had been with Nicole for 2 years. I had met her 4 times. She was attractive in a careful, deliberate way. The kind of beautiful that takes a great deal of effort and wants you to notice both the beauty and the effort. She called me Margaret from the very first meeting, not in a warm way, but in the way of a person who is establishing that certain distances will be maintained. I tried. I want to say that clearly because it matters. I tried. When Daniel called in February and said Nicole's catering business had run into serious debt, suppliers, a failed expansion, an investor who had backed out, I did not lecture him. When he said the debt was close to $200,000 and that they were having trouble with their apartment lease, I did not remind him that I had warned him, gently, twice, that moving in together before they were financially stable seemed fast. When he asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they sorted things out, I said yes. I said yes because he was my son, because Gerald would have said yes, because the house had 2 empty bedrooms, and I was not a woman who could look at her child struggling and close a door. They arrived on a Saturday with a moving truck. Not boxes, a moving truck. The first month was uncomfortable in the specific way that comes from pretending everything is fine. Nicole took over the larger guest room and announced, the day they arrived, that she would need to use the sunroom as an office for her business calls. I told her that was fine. Gerald had built that sunroom for the family, and family was what she was now, or close enough. She rearranged the furniture in it the following Tuesday. Did not ask. I came home from my garden club meeting and the wicker chairs Gerald and I had sat in every evening that last summer were pushed against the wall, and there was a ring light and a backdrop where the reading corner had been. I moved the chairs back the next morning. She moved them again by noon. I let it go. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself 2 people grieving a business failure needed grace, and I had grace to give. By the second month, Nicole had developed what I can only describe as strong opinions about my house. She mentioned twice that the kitchen layout was inefficient. She replaced my dish soap with a brand she preferred without asking. She told Daniel in a conversation I was not meant to hear from the hallway that the house felt cluttered and that living like this long-term was going to be suffocating. Long-term. I stood in that hallway for a moment, very still, and filed that word away. By month 3, she had stopped pretending she was a guest. She began inviting her friends over on weekday afternoons without telling me. I would come downstairs to find 2 or 3 women I did not know sitting in my living room, using my good glasses, while Nicole held court from the armchair that had been Gerald's. I would smile and go to the kitchen and stay there until they left, because I did not want to cause friction, and because every time I came close to saying something, Daniel would appear with that look on his face, the careful, placating look that meant, "Please don't make this harder than it already is, Mom." He was not cruel. I want to be precise about this. My son was not a cruel man. He was a man who had chosen a woman who required a great deal of accommodation, and he had gotten so practiced at providing that accommodation that he had stopped noticing when it extended to other people. When it extended to me, the request to co-sign the refinance came in month 4. I want to tell you what co-signing would have meant, because I think it matters that you understand this clearly. Nicole wanted to refinance the catering business debt, consolidated into a loan secured, in part, by my house. My name on that paperwork would have made me liable. If the business failed again, and there was no reason to believe it would not, given that it had already failed once, my home could have been used to satisfy the debt. My home. The house Gerald built the sunroom on with his own hands. The house where Daniel took his first steps on the kitchen floor. The house I had paid off. Mine, outright, no mortgage, owned free and clear for 11 years. I thought about all of this very quietly, for about 3 days. I did not tell Daniel I was thinking about it. I did not tell Nicole anything at all, which had become my habit. On a Thursday morning, while they were both still asleep, I called a woman I had gone to church with for 20 years. Her name is Audrey, and her late husband had been an state attorney. She gave me the name of his former partner. I made an appointment for the following Monday. I told no one. The appointment lasted 2 hours. I brought the deed to the house, my will, Gerald's death certificate, and a yellow legal pad where I had written down every concern in my careful teacher's handwriting. His name was Robert. He was patient and thorough, and he did not make me feel foolish for not having done this sooner. He explained my options clearly. We talked about a revocable living trust, about updated beneficiary designations, about what co-signing would legally mean, and what my exposure would be. I did not co-sign. When I got home, Nicole was in the kitchen making coffee, and she looked at me with that particular look she had, a kind of appraising steadiness, like she was calculating something, and asked where I had been. "Running errands," I said. I went to the sunroom and sat in Gerald's chair, which she had pushed against the wall again, and I looked at the creek through the window and I thought, I know exactly what I am doing now. The conversation with Daniel happened on a Friday evening. I had made dinner, because I still made dinner most nights out of habit, and because I am not a woman who stops feeding people just because she is angry. Pot roast, which had been Daniel's favorite since he was 9. I set the table with the good placemats. Nicole came downstairs, looked at the table, and said she was actually not feeling well and would eat upstairs. Then she paused at the kitchen door and said, almost as an afterthought, "Daniel said you've been thinking about the refinance." "I have," I said, "and I've decided not to co-sign." She looked at me for a long moment. Not hurt, not surprised, something flatter than that, like a door closing. "I see," she said. She went upstairs. 20 minutes later, Daniel came down. He sat across from me at the table where we had eaten 1,000 meals, and he told me, without quite looking at me, that he and Nicole had talked, and that if I was not willing to help them find a path forward, they were going to need to have a harder conversation. I put down my fork. What kind of harder conversation? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Nicole feels like this arrangement isn't really working, that there isn't enough room for both of you here. She thinks it might be time to think about whether. He stopped, started again. There are really nice assisted living places, Mom. We've looked at a few. You'd have your own space and people around and Daniel. He stopped. This is my house. I know. Your father and I paid for this house for 28 years. I know that, Mom. I have never once asked you to leave. I have never once made Nicole feel unwelcome, though I want you to think very carefully about whether she has extended me the same courtesy. He was quiet. I'm not going to co-sign. I'm not going to move into assisted living. And I want you to hear me when I say that I love you. I have loved you since before you existed in the world. But I need you to understand that this conversation, the fact that we are sitting here having this conversation in this kitchen, is something I will not forget. He left the table without eating. I finished my dinner alone. The pot roast was very good. Things shifted after that, in the way that a house shifts before a storm, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Nicole stopped speaking to me directly. She would address comments to Daniel in my presence as though I were a piece of furniture. Can you ask your mother if she needs the car tomorrow? Can you tell your mother that the Wi-Fi keeps dropping when she streams? Daniel, to his small credit, sometimes looked pained by this, but he never said anything. He was choosing, and he was choosing every single day, and I think he believed I did not notice. I noticed. What Daniel did not know was that I was meeting with Robert again every 2 weeks. We had begun the process of establishing the living trust. The house was being transferred. My will had been revised. I had updated every beneficiary designation, every account, every document that carried my name. I was not angry while I did this. I want to be clear about that. I was not burning with the desire for revenge. I was simply a 67-year-old woman who had learned too slowly, perhaps, that love given without any form of protection is not generosity. It is just exposure. Gerald had known this. He had tried to tell me once, in that gentle way he had, after Daniel's first marriage ended badly, and we had lent money that was never repaid. He had said, Maggie, you can love someone with your whole heart and still have a lock on the door. I had laughed at the time. I was thinking about it now. The morning I left, I did not leave dramatically. There was no argument, no scene, no slamming of doors. I had arranged to stay with Audrey for a few weeks while the trust paperwork was finalized. I packed 1 large suitcase and 2 bags. I watered my plants. I left a note on the kitchen table, short and clear. Daniel, I have gone to stay with Audrey. The house is not part of the refinance, and it will not be. I have retained legal counsel, and the ownership structure has been updated. When you are ready to have a real conversation, I am ready to have one. I love you, Mom. I took one last look at Gerald's roses through the kitchen window. They were still red, still full. Then I drove away. I will tell you what happened next, because I think you deserve to know, and because I think it matters. Daniel called 4 times that day. I did not answer. I texted him that I was safe, that I was with Audrey, and that I needed a few days. On the 3rd day, he came to Audrey's house alone. He sat in her living room, and he looked like a man who had not slept, and I could see on his face that he had been thinking, and that the thinking had been uncomfortable. Good, he said. I didn't know the trust had already been set up. You didn't ask? I said. I didn't think. He stopped. I didn't think you'd actually do anything about it. That, I said, is exactly the problem. We talked for 2 hours. It was not easy. At one point he cried, which I was not expecting, and which made it harder because he was still my son, and I was still his mother, and that does not change no matter what gets said around a dinner table. He told me that Nicole had pushed him toward the refinance idea, that she had framed it as a practical solution, that she had told him I would go along with it if he just asked the right way. I asked him if he believed that now. He said he didn't know what he believed. I told him I wasn't angry. I told him that was true. What I explained, was recalibrated. I had spent 3 years after his father died being soft in places that had needed to be firm. I had let grief make me permeable, had let it convince me that accommodation was the same thing as love. Your father and I built something here, I said. Not just the house, the thing inside it, the stability you grew up with. I protected that thing badly. I am protecting it better now. What does that mean for us? He asked. It means I am still your mother. It means I love you the same way I have always loved you. But it also means that what is mine, and that the next person who suggests otherwise is going to find out very quickly that I am not as soft as I have appeared. He half laughed at that. The laugh sounded like Gerald. Nicole moved out 6 weeks later. I was not told directly. Daniel called on a Sunday and said they had decided to take some space from each other, that she had gone back to Charlotte, that he was figuring things out. I said I was sorry it had been painful for him. I meant it. He asked if he could come for dinner the following Saturday. I said yes. I made pot roast again, and this time we sat at the table together for nearly 2 hours, and he told me about a job offer he had received, and I told him about a trip I was thinking of taking with Audrey, a long weekend in Savannah. He looked around the kitchen at one point, at the dish soap I had put back in its place, at the wicker chairs visible through the sunroom door, back in their corner by the window. It looks like itself again, he said. Yes, I said, it does. I am back in my house now. It is mine in every sense that it always was, and in a few additional legal senses it was not before. Robert sends me a very reassuring holiday card every December. Gerald's roses came back this spring, bigger than ever. I have stopped being surprised by that. I think about what I would tell a woman in the position I was in, 4 months into a situation that had quietly, incrementally, moved from hospitality into something else entirely. I think about what I wish I had heard. I would tell her this. The people who love you do not hold your home over your head. They do not make you justify your presence in your own kitchen. They do not ask you to sign your security away and call it family. And here is the other thing. The thing I had to learn late and would not wish on anyone. Leaving is not losing. Leaving quietly, with a plan, with everything in order. That is not defeat. That is the move of a woman who knows exactly what she is worth and has stopped waiting for someone else to figure it out. Gerald knew. He always knew. I am a slow learner, but I get there. I have thought a great deal, in the months since all of this settled, about how I ended up in that position in the first place. Not angry at anyone in particular, not even at Nicole, not really, but genuinely curious about the sequence of small decisions that led to a morning where my own son could stand in my kitchen and suggest, calmly, that I put my home on the line for a debt I had nothing to do with creating. What I have come to understand is this. It did not happen all at once. It never does. It happened in increments, so small that each one seemed manageable, seemed like the gracious response, seemed like what a good mother would do. I said yes to the guest room, then yes to the sunroom, then yes to the quiet, because I did not want friction. And somewhere in all those small yeses I had communicated something I did not intend to communicate. I had communicated that my boundaries were negotiable, that my comfort was secondary, that my house and everything in it was available for use. The thing about gradual erosion is that you often don't feel it happening. You feel it after. You feel it the morning you're standing in a kitchen that smells like someone else's coffee, and you realize the dish soap has been replaced, and the chairs are in the wrong place, and your son is looking at you like you are an obstacle to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. I do not think Daniel is a bad man. I think he loved me, and also loved a woman who required a great deal from him, and he had never been taught, or perhaps had forgotten, that love for one person does not justify harm to another. That accommodation, taken far enough, becomes a kind of cruelty. Not dramatic cruelty, the quiet, incremental kind that is almost harder to name because it wears such a reasonable face. What saved me was not anger. It was clarity. The decision to call Robert, To sit in that office and ask hard questions about what I actually owned and what I stood to lose. That was not a decision made in bitterness. It was a decision made by a woman who finally looked at her situation honestly and chose, perhaps for the first time in 3 years, to act in her own interest without apologizing for it. There is something I want to say to anyone watching this who recognizes something in Margaret's story. Not the specific details, but the feeling. The feeling of having been generous for so long that people have mistaken your generosity for an unlimited resource. The feeling of watching someone you love look right through you. You are allowed to know what you have. You are allowed to protect it. You are allowed to make the call, sign the document, and sit quietly with the knowledge that you have done what needed to be done, without announcing it, without performing it, without waiting for someone to give you permission. Wisdom is not passive. Wisdom is knowing, precisely and without drama, where you stand and what you will not surrender. Margaret knew. She had always known. She had simply needed a season of difficulty to remember it. The roses came back. They always come back. For women like her.